truly been a pleasure and a blessing to be an advisor on the NC10 committee. I am a proud graduate of Bennett College. I'm a Bennett Belle. Yes. Computer science major, and the impact that it certainly had on my life, it was transformative. And I'm extremely proud to work for St. Augustine's University under Dr. Christine Johnson McPhail's leadership, and making sure that other students have very similar opportunities that I have been blessed with. So I am delighted to moderate this session. We have such exceptional panelists, and I'm just going to take a few minutes just to introduce them both. Dr. Alva Adams was elected to her fourth full term last year, representing the 12th Congressional District of North Carolina. She serves on the Committee on Financial Services, Committee on Education and Labor, and the Committee on Agriculture. She holds several leadership positions. Representative Adams' signature legislative accomplishment is the enactment of the Future Act, which all of us are very aware of. And as you know, the Future Act provides $255 million in permanent funding for all minority-serving institutions, including $85 million for HBCUs. And just in talking to her briefly, she has more on the table that's coming, so I'm really excited about that. Representative Adams is the founder and co-chair of the Congressional Bipartisan HBCU Caucus, which promotes bipartisan legislation in support of HBCUs, including $1.3 billion to rebuild campus infrastructure. Adam Harris is a staff writer at The Atlantic, covering national politics and a national fellow at New America. He is the author of The State Must Provide, a narrative history of racial inequity in higher education, published by Echo, an imprint of HarperCollins. He was previously a reporter at the Chronicle of Higher Education, where he covered federal education policy at historically black colleges and universities. In 2021, he was named to the Forbes 30 Under 30 list. His writing has appeared in BBC, Bleacher Report, and Ebony magazine. Adam is currently a senior fellow at New America and earned a degree in political science from Alabama A&M University. And I should have noted that Representative Adams is also a graduate of an HBCU. Twice graduate, at North Carolina A&T State University. So let's just give them a round of applause. So I just want to start out my questions, and this is a question to both of you. You have dedicated much of your careers to uplifting the story of HBCUs across the country. Can you share with us what brought you to this work, and how did your own experiences attending an HBCU shape your trajectory? And we'll start with Representative Adams.
Well, thank you very much for your question, and thank you all for being here, and Creed, thank you for the invitation, and to this wonderful center, thank you. And to all of my HBCU family, you are HBCU strong. And I am just so happy to be here and to be a part of this family, and it's just amazing, and to be on this campus. So clearly I want to thank my chancellor of residency, Dr. Armstrong, thank you so much. I see North Carolina A&T is here, and Bennett College. Those are three distinct personal connections that I have. But again, all of you are part of my family. Let me just say that it was an HBCU in Greensboro, North Carolina, that made a committed investment in me many years ago. I walked the ghetto streets of Newark, New Jersey. My mom did domestic work. She cleaned other folks' houses so I could get a good education. She was not able to attend an HBCU or any CU for that matter. But she understood, even as a domestic worker, how important it was for me to get an education. And so I embarked upon my career in Greensboro, North Carolina. And it was there that I had professors and administrators who really took the time to steer me right. Now, I've got to tell you, and I'm not ashamed to say it, I was not fully prepared academically for college work. When I came through high school in Newark, New Jersey, my counselors recommended that I take a trade or do something like that. There were only a few kids in my school who looked like me. But I'm grateful for a strong mother and for mentors who helped me along my way. And so I just, as I have traveled from school board to Congress, I've been in public service now for more than 36 years. I'm getting ready to embark upon my 19th election, my 19th campaign. I taught 40 years at Bennett College in Greensboro, and those students were very much like I was. And so it is the spirit of giving back that I have worked as hard as I have in the U.S. Congress to make sure that my colleagues understood how important our schools are, and the contributions that we make, and what we need, and what we have not got. Our schools, as you know, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, are over 150, 60, 70, and more years old. And many of our structures on our campus are as old as our institutions. And I'll talk about my second bill a little bit later, and that's why it's needed. But that's kind of what led me, and that's what guides me. And this is why I guess some people have given me the affectionate name of the Godmother of Hbcus, but I tell you, I'm proud of that, because I'm proud to look out and be the mother who will protect all of our children, all of our HBCUs, because we have over 102, about 102 across this country, and we have had to make do with a little, but we have done extraordinarily well with what we have gotten. My goal is to make sure that our schools not only survive, but that they thrive. And there are many, many things that we have to do to ensure that that happens. So, I can move on, and we can talk more about that later. But that's kind of how I got to where I am now. I had that guidance from my mother. She had a 10th grade education. She wasn't able to do what I was able to do because of her and because of all of my extended family. And so my goal is to give back and to make sure that the Congress does what it needs to do, should have already done, and as we move forward and ensure that our schools will have what they need for this century now and for the next. Thank you.
So I tell a story at the beginning of the book about when I first arrived at Alabama A&M, and also kind of talk about the legacy that my family has had at Alabama A&M. Right? My uncle was a drum major there, my mom was there, my sister was on the volleyball team there when I was there, my oldest sister actually went to Hampton, but there's a bit of my work that actually hinges on another school in Alabama. My dad's alma mater, Alabama State University. He went to Alabama State, he transferred in. He went to Louisville first and stopped out. They didn't have the supports around him there to get him through to persistence. And when he got to Alabama State, he found a community of folks who helped him get to graduation. He tells a story about picking pecans. When he was on campus, and one of his professors saw him picking pecans, and they say, he was having dinner at the professor's house on a regular basis. That sort of community aspect of the institutions. And then when I got into my professions, when I started covering higher education, I noticed at the Chronicle there wasn't a dedicated reporter to covering the HBCUs. And knowing how important those institutions were to my family, knowing how important they were to my classmates on campus, knowing what they were still doing for Black students seemed incongruent to me. And also understanding, right, when I was at Alabama A&M, there was an institution 10 minutes down the road, University of Alabama Huntsville, that had a larger endowment, that had, you know, newer buildings, newer facilities, and it was founded 75 years after my own institution was founded. And I was trying to understand all of those, you know, inconsistencies. And so that's kind of what led me to digging a little bit more, to, you know, understanding the role that federal and state policy has played in shaping sort of an equitable environment that we recognize today, and really digging into the ways that we can address it. So that sort of, I know several people mentioned it earlier, this idea of legacy of the institutions, the idea of nurturing at the institutions, that has really been propulsive to me and has kept me in the work.
Thank you. So Representative Adams, you have worked at the federal level to increase bipartisan support of HBCUs. What have you identified as the most pressing challenges in advocating for HBCUs in this level?
Well, just recently I got into a debate, I won't mention with whom. Wasn't an HBCU, but I think he thought he was, because he had some black students at his school. But anyway, let me get back to your question. I think one of the biggest challenges that I've seen is, first of all, it's all about education and educating not only my colleagues, but the staff and everyone else, even businesses and other folks who we come in contact with through our HBCU partnership challenge. When I got to Congress, and after having served in local state government for almost plus 30 years, I realized that many of my colleagues didn't know what HBCU was. And some of them looked like us, who didn't know. And of course, they're not from areas, they may not have graduated from those schools, they may not have parents who've been cheerleaders and all those other great things, and brothers. But so that's one of the things, really educating my colleagues. The bipartisan HBCU caucus, which I co-founded shortly after getting there, was organized for three reasons. First, to educate, to expand the knowledge base about our schools nationally. Secondly, to educate, as I said before, my colleagues and members of Congress, their staff. And then finally, to create and successfully pass bipartisan legislation that would support our institutions and our students. And we've pretty much done that. We've got over 108 members now. It is bipartisan, but it's bicameral. So we also have people in the Senate. So that's one aspect. That's one challenge. The second challenge is trying to get people maybe on the outside who are also lobbying for the same dollars that we are to understand who HBCUs are, why we were organized. And the person I told you I was having a debate about, I said, listen, let me tell you, you weren't founded before 1964, 65, 64. And if you were not founded for the purpose of educating black children who look like me, then you're not an HBCU. I don't care how many students you may have that look like me, you cannot become an HBCU retroactively. The other thing is that, you know, we were talking about infrastructure, and I think as we talk to folks and educate them about our schools, we're talking about schools that, as I said, well over centuries, almost 2 centuries now. And yet we've been getting crumbs of money. As he said to me, he's tired of getting crumbs. But anyway, I don't want to get into that guy. But, so I think that's the second thing. People have to understand what our purpose, the purpose of our schools, why we were started, why we were founded. And I try to tell the gentleman, listen, I'm happy that you have some black kids coming to your school now. We were founded because there was no place else for our kids to go. All right, so our schools were founded out of the necessity and the need to educate kids who look like me. And so now that the doors are opening up for them to go wherever they want to go, that has not always been the case. And if you never had an African American student in your school, you would still move on because you have for all the years that you've been in this. I think those are two of the kind of major things, really educating folks to understand who we are, the kinds of contributions that we are still making, whether they are economic contributions to our communities, and clearly we're doing that. But we have some, I gotta tell you, I was a faculty member for 40 years, and we have some of the best faculty and staff on our campuses. And we care about our students. We know who they are. And many of us are like them. My students, many of those students that I taught for 40 years were first generation. So I knew the trials and the tribulations that they had. And it was, like I said, I was able to go on and get my bachelor's and master's from North Carolina A&T, and to go on and get my PhD from the Ohio State University, but only because of the North Carolina A&T and HBCU. That's what we do. That's the investment that we make. That's how we nurture and where we guide our young men and women into what we know they can become.
Thank you for that. And I'm going to have to follow up to something that you said based on our conversation in an earlier session today. But Adam, your new book, The State Must Provide, Why America's Colleges Have Always Been Unequal and How to Set Them Right, reckons with the historical disinvestment of HBCUs and Black students. Can you give us an overview of this disinvestment and the impact it will continue to have in the future of HBCUs?
Absolutely. So actually something that Representative Adams just said is actually a good segue into this. So talking about that, the propulsion that these institutions, not HBCUs, might have had, if they never enrolled a Black student, and that's sort of making up some of that difference. So going back to Mississippi in the 1860s, right? After the Civil War, you have white parents who are very afraid that the University of Mississippi is going to enroll a Black student. And they are writing letters to professors, they're petitioning to lawmakers, and the faculty at the University of Mississippi says, okay, let's do something about this. So they write a letter. They write a letter to the local paper, and they say, we would rather close and all resign than enroll a Black student. Fast forward a couple of years, 1871, Alcorn State University is founded. They're given a guaranteed appropriation of $50,000 for at least a decade. 4 years later, 1875, the so-called Redeemers sweep back in with the quote-unquote White Revolution, and they reduced that appropriation to $15,000 a year. 1 year later, they reduced that appropriation again to $5,500 a year. There's stories like this, as you all know, in every state, where you start to develop that stratification. And then it's not, over time, the early 1900s, states, legislatures, they say, oh, well, what can we do to raise our HBCU up? And they bring in people. William T.B. Williams famously went to Kentucky and said, hey, here's what you can do. Your girl's dorm is fire prone and it doesn't have a fire escape. Your boy's dorm is in a mud hole. Your electrical plant doesn't have power. Your faculty are underpaid. They're fantastic, but they're underpaid. Your buildings need renovations. And this is around 1914, 1950. The state says we have $40,000 to do with that, what you can. And you have Kentucky State University now that did what it could with that money. And you have several institutions that were able to do what they could with that money, but it was not enough. And the state knew that it was not enough. And so that sort of legacy from the founding of these institutions as places that were built to serve people who the rest of higher education would not, into now, where you have instances where an institution may make the jump to become a high research producing activity institution and not receive the funding that a predominantly white institution will receive from the same state when they make that jump. There are little things like that where this discrimination is still happening, as you all know. And the thing that I was trying to figure out is how do you begin to change that? Bills like the Ignite Act, things like the federal government actually moving in and saying, hey, states, We had a settlement in 1980. North Carolina made a settlement with the federal government that the Carter administration official from the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare said it seemed like a joint agreement between the U.S. and North Carolina of everything that the state of North Carolina has done wrong for its HBCUs and for its black colleges. North Carolina has not lived up to that agreement. Mississippi was supposed to, $35 million was supposed to create an endowment for black colleges after the air settlement. They've raised $1 million to this point. So states are not living up to these agreements that the federal government has said, okay, our hands are off of it now. And so is it time for the federal government to say, hey, maybe we take another look because you're not living up to your settlements. So I think kind of looking over that mark of discrimination, looking at the studies that have already been done, the Truman Commission, where it was saying, it's something like 80% of the black students who were attending medical school at the time were doing so at 2 of the HBCUs, and different things like that. We know the role that these institutions play. Now it's a matter of moving to making right what has historically been done wrong.
Yeah. If I can, and thank you. You're a very intelligent one. Thank you. Thank you for all of your research too. And you are exactly right. We've got to tell the story, but as I said to him, we've got to uncover some things. Now, let me just say, I just sit on the Ag Committee, I'm Vice Chair of Ag, and of course today I just put my resolution out to acknowledge the 1890s. They are 131 years. So they're 131. And what he just said sort of reminded me of the last Farm Bill that we had. We had 1890s across the country, one in North Carolina, that's North Carolina A&T. But yet we have 2 schools of agriculture here. North Carolina State and North Carolina A&T State University. But it's just incredible the difference in terms of the support and the funding and the inequity. As I served in the North Carolina House for 20 years and discovered that state was getting a 1-1 match as was required by the federal government. North Carolina A&T was not getting it. And even today, if they're getting it, they just barely got it. But even today, we're finding the same kind of inequity. Now, it's not about the funding, really. It's not that they don't have it. I served in the State House. I know that crowd down there. So it's not that they don't have it, it's where you put your priorities.
Yes.
And for example, the last I checked, North Carolina A&T was maybe getting 75% instead of the 101%, and the state was getting 600%. Now, I was an art teacher, not math, but I can tell you that's not good math. and so again, it's not about the lack of funding. It's about the priorities and where you place the priorities. What we did, 3 things. One, because I believe that the federal government needs to hold the states accountable. We need to penalize them, but they talked me out of that. But what we did do, one of the things that was happening with the 1890s, all the 1890s had to return. They got their funding. They had to return everything. They could only keep 20%. But the other schools, 1862, they could keep it all. I mean, black folks can count. That doesn't make any sense. So we were able to rectify that, and that had been going on for so many years. We could only keep 20%. That was just wrong. But the other thing that we did in that bill was to require the states now to send us a report as to how much are you matching, so that we can look at it. One of the things that I know about elected folks is that you got to have data before that. And so if we have the data to show it, then I think we can encourage members of Congress to take some action. But there have been so many inequities. I appreciate all that you've done to uncover it, but we got to keep talking about it. We got to put it out there, and we've got to hold elected officials accountable for actually rectifying this wrong. But I'm sorry, I didn't mean to jump in.
That was a perfect follow-up. So Adam, how do we make it play?
So there are a couple of different ways. One, with, as I mentioned, bills like Ignite that actually have robust solutions for funding for infrastructure, for that deferred maintenance that has been, that states have been allowed to sort of languish for a long time. Another way is through those investigations, holding states accountable. States are responsible under Title VI for not, basically the federal government is not supposed to fund institutions or states that are discriminating against black students or race, gender, whatever it may be. If you look at a state like Alabama, for instance, where we also have, we have technically 3 land grants between Tuskegee, Alabama, and Auburn. Auburn was declared on the same day Bo Jackson won the Heisman as the best college football player in the country. A federal judge said this is the most segregated institution in the state of Alabama. On the exact same day, they had about 3% black students at the time. Now they have about 5% black students. But they have fewer black students today than they had in 2002. And yet, Auburn receives 3 times its federal land grant match when Alabama receives, I think, like 60% of its federal land grant match. So holding states accountable for, one, living up to these agreements that they made with the federal government, now that would fall under the Department of Civil Rights and the Department of Education, or Office for Civil Rights and the Department of Education. And it was actually a former assistant secretary who keyed me into the fact that there are still several states that haven't even made these settlements. Maryland was recently able to get out for under theirs $577 million split between 4 colleges over 10 years. But we've seen how if states are able to sort of shortchange their settlements, to say that we're going to give these HBCUs a little bit of what they're owed, right? An independent expert said they were owed at least $2.73 billion, at least. And yet, they get $577 million. In Mississippi, $500 million over 17 years split between 3 institutions. We've already seen that settlement was not fully given out, and the University of Mississippi can make $500 million in 5 years in private donation. So that's not actually going to sort of level the playing field for the institutions. I think, one, you have the institutions who are right now, the Georgetowns, the Browns, the Harvards, the Yales, who are acknowledging their legacies of slavery and segregation and Jim Crow, the University of Virginia, where Thomas Jefferson said, I could not imagine an institution at the University of Virginia that did not have slavery at its root. I think those institutions may have something to owe to the historically black colleges. So where is, a place like UNC, which has had its, maybe UNC has something to owe to the black colleges in the state. Maybe, I'm just saying. And so I think that if we start to look beyond just the traditional, there are ways that the state legislature could do that. Looking at things like unrestricted bequests that the predominantly white institutions have. Yes, endowment money is tied to all sorts of different things, but those unrestricted bequests can be redistributed in a more equitable way for the institution, particularly for the public institutions. And so I think that we need to start thinking of more inventive strategies alongside enforcing some of those mechanisms that we've had in the past, right? States didn't really, there was a brief period where states and universities started to get their act together when the federal government was actively enforcing some of those civil rights laws. So it was right after the Adams settlement when the Supreme Court said, hey, Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, do your job. And they did, and the Carter administration had a rather robust investigation of states, and then as soon as the Reagan administration came in, all of that went away, and they made those sort of joint agreements. And so I think that if we start to think of some of those more inventive strategies alongside the kind of enforcement mechanisms we have in the government.
So Representative Adams, earlier today in an earlier session, there was a lot of discussion about how important it is for us to tell our story. And I'm just curious, what more can we do? This is a room full of leaders. What can we do on the federal and state level to really raise the prominence of HBCUs? What do we need to do more of?
Well, I think one of the first things that I see here is that that first of all, we got to all be on the same page and talking the same talk. But not be afraid to approach your elected leaders. Sometimes, I have people sometimes call me and say, oh, I'm sorry, I called. Well, my number's listed, you called, and I ran for office, and and I want to hear what you have to say. Because we should be stakeholder representatives, and you all are stakeholders. But I think this is, one good way for us, first of all, to gather and to share ideas, and then to come up with an action plan that we can all support and that we all agree to, and present that. You have agendas that, I remember in my days on the campus, you have to have your goals and your objectives, and you have to have your plans, and you come around, then it's time for accreditation and all those things. So, but I think that message has got to not only resonate within the group, but we are the family, so it's got to resonate within the family. But then I think as we have been engaged as a bipartisan, bicameral coalition through the HBCU Partnership Challenge, where we have partners in business who, many of you have taken the Partnership Challenge, many businesses. We have over 60 right now who have engaged in the Partnership Challenge that will help sort of get the schools, the students, the businesses, and all interacting. I hear so much about D&I these days, and companies saying that, oh, they want to diversify. And then we don't know where to find anybody. You say, well, listen, we have the pipeline. So if you're looking for the best engineers, the best folks who are getting educated in STEM fields and so forth, HBCUs are where you need to go. So I think that's, we can do that by engaging our partners outside. That I think is one of the things, whoever in your communities. But I think if we should come together with a collective agenda for our schools. And I can tell you that one of the things that I know, and Brother Harris mentioned it, and he said, he talked about the deferred maintenance, things that have just gone. There are $25 billion of deferred maintenance across our HBCUs across this country. Now that's just absolute, first of all, it's unfortunate, but it should not be. And it's because, not that we are sloppy and that we don't get our roofs fixed and all of that, but all of that takes money. And if you are systemically underfunded, you're not getting the funding that the other schools are getting, who may not be HBCUs, and you go on their campuses and everything is bling and so forth, and everything's working. It's not that we have been neglected. We have not neglected our schools, our students. We haven't done that. But it's the folks who control the public purse. And finally, I will tell you that you're not going to change policy until you change policy makers. I'm not a big give a political speech, but I got to tell you that it's who's when you say you're going to get your general assemblies to do, people are not going to just do right because they should do right. You got to make them do right, but you got to make sure that the people that we are engaging with have a mindset to do right, because they do believe in the strength of our HBCUs and the contributions that we are continuing to make to our communities. So you got to get people thinking that way. You've got to get people thinking that way. And there are folks out there who think that way. But that means that we have to be involved and engaged, and we got to find them and get them in the right place. Now, I'm not going to be in the Congress forever. The constituents may not let me be there forever, but I don't intend, based on my own agenda, that I'm going to do that. But I'm going to do everything I can while I'm there to do all that I can for our schools. But I need you to help me. And nobody has, and I'll tell you, politicians listen to you all. You all are some powerful people, whether you know it or you should know that. You are. And there's no way that we can have an infrastructure bill that we're looking at now with trillions of dollars. And HBCUs are not part of that. And that's insulting, should be insulting to all of us. And that's the message that we've got to take, not just to the Congress, but also to the House on Pennsylvania Avenue.
Thank you for that. And I do want to leave a few minutes for questions from the audience. We may have about 10 minutes, but any questions? Yes, Dr. Robinson.
Yes. We have microphones.
Microphone, take on it.
I'm just excited to ask this question. I want to ask it. So, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Ram.
Elwood Robinson, and Chancellor at Winston-Salem State University. Representative Adams, when you get a gift, when you get money from philanthropy or the federal government, sometimes it's not the amount that you get, but it's the restrictions that you put on when you get those funds. So one of the things that I think that is really crucial for us right now is we receive a lot of money from the federal government, but there are some restrictions on those dollars, how you spend those dollars. There's also a time frame on those dollars that makes it almost impossible for us to spend those dollars. I'm struggling. If you ask me what keeps me up at night, you guys gave me a lot of money. I got $85 million, but you told me I got to spend it by May. And having to go through state contracts and be able to do all the things you have to do, that's an impossible task. And then we also have to put together an additional team to be able to manage those funds. Because if we have to operate on a day-to-day basis, these are all new funds that we have to learn how to expend. So my question to you is, how can we get your help in helping people move that deadline? Because COVID's not going to go away in May. I mean, COVID is a long-term generational effect. Those dollars you need to be able to spend those dollars over a long period of time.
Well, thank you, Dr. Robinson, for your question. And you gave you all that money we want you to spend. But let me just say that I think one of the things, and I, first of all, to everyone here, if you have ideas or concerns, etc., please make sure that you get them to my office. And to send them to Washington, call my office in Washington to my chief there, who helps me with HBCUs. Smirty is also my education person. But let me just say that we can and we should put some legislative language together that would address this concern. You're not the first person who has raised it, I will tell you, because we had an issue during the last money that whether it was CARES or, and I'm not sure, we put out a lot of money because we really needed to do it for the people. So I think we can make some arrangements to make sure that you have ample time to spend it. The federal government doesn't need it. You need it. So, and you are absolutely right. COVID is here. We're going to have to find some way to live with it and to protect ourselves. And so I understand all of the sacrifices that our HBCUs had to make during COVID. Unprepared, we have set, but we don't have big endowments. Many of us are enrollment driven. And so, when the students, we had to send the students out, we had to make sure that they were educated at home, all of the things that you had to do. To rob Peter to pay Paul, well, you got to pay Peter back, I know that. So, but yeah, we can work on some stuff. You will send an email to me, and because I'm sure that you speak for all of the other schools here with that same problem. We're happy that we had the money to give. We want you to spend it.
I wanted to thank you for all the work that you represent. It's just awesome to know that you're speaking on our behalf. I have been in the area at St. Augustine's about 6 months, and I'm increasingly aware of the inequity within the inequity when it comes to HBCUs. It seems to me that there may be a general idea that all HBCUs are created equal, but there's a range of HBCUs from those who enjoy higher levels of funding. I'm happy to help my brother over there spend his money. But here's the idea. Can we introduce some language into the narrative about capacity building that would help the smaller institutions like St. Augustine's and some of the others that hover around 1,000 or below, so that there may be a more equitable distribution of the funds? And then we also have the fact that we're private, so that adds another dimension to the conversation. So that whole notion of capacity building, I know Dr. Shaw and I'll be talking about how we can collaborate more with our own resources in the city of Raleigh. But I think that notion, if we could talk about capacity building, could then more what we call ease the pain a little bit between that diversification that we find in HBCUs.
Well, you're absolutely right in terms of differences even with it. It's like some folks think all black people think alike and look alike. That's not true. We have more diversity in our culture than most folks. But and I do understand the differences between our public universities, our public HBCUs and our private HBCUs and the challenges that each face. And so we have a very good working relationship with not only UNCF, but TMCF and NAFIO as well. I know that we are, many of our schools, especially our private institutions, are enrollment driven. That we depend on having those students. So we'll work on some legislation to try to make sure that as we are shaping this final bill, which the speaker has said is going to be voted out, we'll be going back to Washington on the 20th actually. So we expect to vote that bill out on the 23rd. So we got a little work to do, folks. Make some calls, tweet, text, whatever it is you do. But yeah, I think we can. I think those are small things that we can do as long as we know what some of the problems are. I think we can put some legislation in place, some language in these bills that we're sending out.
Great questions.
And you all get this gentleman's book and read it.
I brought none. Can I get it on?
First of all, I just want to commend Congresswoman Adams, you, and the work you've done and the geniusness of creating the HBCU caucus. I hope we all realize that without the efforts of that caucus, that $85 million that you tried hard to spend, and the money that we've never gotten. And so this question is to both of you. This convening is of the NC-10. We have 10% of all the HBCUs here in this state. Do you, either of you think, based on your research, Ms. Harrison, your history with the North Carolina legislature, I'm new to North Carolina, could we see something similarly created? We were talking about changing the power dynamic. I think Mr. Ford talked about that earlier. Would that be a way that we could change the power dynamic and we can encourage our legislators, those policymakers you talked about, Representative Adams? Do you think that's possible here in North Carolina?
Well, my mother preached for the past 38 years of her life. She passed away at 90. She taught me to believe that all things are possible. So I do think so. I think we have to strategically, though, come up with a plan to do it. We're getting ready to go into an election season. It's what they call a midterm. But that may be the appropriate time. These are folks who are looking for your support.
Yes.
And North Carolina, I understand, will be getting a 14th district. I don't think it's going to be in this area though, but regardless of where it is, you know, we survive as politicians because you make that possible. And you know, sometimes I think as citizens we don't give ourselves enough credit for that. But yeah, I mean, you know, as they say, you gotta knock and the door will be open, ask and you will receive. And I just think that if you don't ask, you won't get nothing. You still might not get it if you ask, but think about it if you don't ask. Then you wonder, well, you know what, I wonder what happened to that ask. So let's pursue that. I think, you know, I do believe that it's possible, especially now, when you think about all of the discussion about racism and race in this country and so forth, and I'm sure that he would agree, this is probably the best time to do it.
Yeah, and actually to your point about kind of the power that the constituents have, right? And you going back to that UNCF report, HBCUs is producing something like $14.8 billion of economic impact for the country. And so money talks, and they know the economic impact that you all have on the community. It's just a matter. And so they know that impact that you all have on the community. And so, you know, it's the thing in journalism. I worked at ProPublica before I went to Chronicle of Higher Education. The whole thing was sustained outrage. Like, we are doing so much, like telling them again and again and again, because, you know, this sort of information economy we have right now, you know, you can hear something on Sunday and forget about it by Tuesday. But if you hear it on Sunday and Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday, then it's like, oh yeah, actually, I think I was supposed to do something about that. And so that sort of sustained outrage, keeping the pressure on is
well, that's why you're hearing so much about HBCU. Everybody's talking about it. Good. I mean, everybody's writing about it. Good. And so everybody wants to be on that good train. And so, you know, this is why we were able to do the things that we've been able to do. And for our schools, our private institutions who benefited from, you know, clearing out that debt-free, you know, again, we've got to relieve our folks, our schools, from some of this burden and baggage that they're carrying. It wasn't your fault, and so you shouldn't be held hostage because of it.
So I think we may have time for just one more question.
Oh, let's get to more.
Representative Adams has spoken, so two more. Any additional questions? Okay, well, I'm going to follow her directive. I'm just going to ask one more here, too. So, and this just applies really to you both. HBCUs play a critical role, as we all know, in educating Black Americans. Though traditional measures of success don't always accurately portray the true impact of HBCUs, how can we work together to strengthen our case for student success and the need for public investment? And once again, this has more to do with how we are measured against other PWIs and stuff.
Yeah, one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is how states kind of make up their performance-based funding models. So, you know, it's like maybe if you have your performance-based funding model, you include things like the amount of low-income students. Like maybe that's weighted more than, you know, where, you know, something like 60% of HBCU students are eligible for federal Pell Grant. So maybe you weigh that a little bit greater in your funding model, because one of the things that a lot of these states do is, okay, we have our performance-based funding model. It's based on enrollment. It's based on graduation rates. It's based on kind of this host of factors. And then you end up taking money away from the institutions in the next year that they might have needed in order to better fulfill or continue to fulfill the role they're doing. And that puts more strain on the faculty. It puts more strain on the staff. I'm just remembering when I was at Alva A&M, you know, my professors were Stephanie Allen, so my African American history class, Professor Diane Wilkinson taught all of my philosophy courses, and Western Political Thought with Dr. Turner, which I got Dan, which we're happy about. But they were also facilitating all of these different roles between the work in the department. Their work as student advisor, their work in mental health, just like all of these different things that these professors were doing. That if the state hadn't been providing them more money based on the performance-based funding model, maybe they could have hired additional people to help take and alleviate some of that stress, or paid them for the additional work that they were having to do. And so I just think if you start to take one of the first steps, you kind of take a look at those state-based, performance-based funding models, particularly for public institutions, to sort of bring equity, bring the amount of black and brown students that attend these institutions. In Oklahoma, there are also as many black students at Langston University as there are at Oklahoma State and the University of Oklahoma combined. And all of them are public institutions, and Oklahoma State and the University of Oklahoma have something like 40 or 45,000 students together. And an institution of 1,450 students is doing more work in educating black students than both of them are. So thinking about those performance-based funding models and taking equity into account is important.
I think we have to realize that you cut the pie equally. If you had, maybe you just need a slice and give me the rest of it because I haven't gotten what you got. And I think we have to really get folks really thinking that way, that being confronting the inequity and not try to deny that it does not exist. And I can tell you, even after the Future Act passed, I think some people felt like, we've got to ignite out here now. We're trying to ignite this fire, keep this flame going in our schools so that we can address the infrastructure and some of the other needs that we have. But we want to do that. First, we want to get that $25 billion and get the infrastructure in place. And then we need funding to move on. You can't have faculty trying to do research and then your lab is falling apart, that kind of thing. And let me tell you this one little story. One of my colleagues called me, texted me, wanting to help her with a student in her district in Chicago. Chicago doesn't have any HBCUs, right? And my colleague didn't attend an HBCU, but she knows I talk it all the time, so what she knows about it, she probably got it from me. The point is, she wanted me to help her with a student who didn't get an opportunity to get a room on a campus, HBCU campus, fine HBCU campus, and the young lady evidently, so she asked me if I would check and so forth. So I did. I called the school, me and my staff now, and we found out that this student did not get her paperwork in on time for her room. Okay, you all know about that, right? And so I called her back and I said, Mr. Kelly, you need to get on this young lady, they waiting for stuff, so that's why she didn't get her room and so forth and so on, So she got with her and so gave her that riot act, and so she paid her money. She gets to her school, and one of our fine HBCUs too, actually. And so she gets to her school, and Representative Kelly gives me a call back, and she said, the student that you helped get her room, she got her room, she got on the campus, and she said they must have put her in an old building or something because she doesn't have any air conditioning. And then she went on to, she texted me, right? She said, could this be? I texted her back and I said, Kelly, absolutely. Absolutely. I was in a building 30 years and didn't have air. I put a fan in it, but the point I'm trying to make is that this colleague of mine, because she did not attend an HBCU, she didn't understand. She just couldn't believe it. I found out she went to the university there. So they had everything. And I said to her, it absolutely could be, it is the case. I said, but first of all, she needs to be grateful that she's there. She's coming in and enjoy the building. She's going to learn a lot, and clearly she's going to excel because she's at an HBCU. I said, but that's why we need Ignite. Yeah. to attract students, to attract faculty and staff, and we don't have the facilities that we need. Now, you know, yes, I got a fine education. I didn't have air in my room at Holland Hall at the NC. Not at all. And I didn't complain about it, or didn't have air at home in New Jersey. I didn't have air at home. But the point is, that was a realization for her. You know, she's got a lot of PBIs in her community, but she now knows that there's some students in her district attending a fine HBCU. You know, and me ask you, could this be? And all that. But I'm saying that's what happens. And so we got to really, you know, make it plain and really uncover some things because that should not be the case. You know, that really should not be the case. But I'm sorry.
Yeah, that was a perfect story. Let's give a round of applause. And now I have the pleasure of introducing my good friend. We call her the powerhouse on the committee, Dr. Minnie Brown. She is an instructor at North Carolina Central University and once again one of the senior advisors on the Listening to the NC10 initiative. Minnie is also nationally recognized for public school advocacy and for Board of Education leadership. Minnie?
Oh, you y'all can do better than that. Thank you, Representative Alva Adams, for always advocating for historically Black colleges, for our success and our survival. Adam, I want to thank you for being a truth teller, being a young man that came to us and told a story that we can all relate to. And thank you, Deborah, for being at St. Alva and remembering your time as a Benedale. That's all good. Like Deborah said, I'm Minnie Brown. I'm a senior advisor, and I can say that I trump probably all of you in here for having historically Black college experience. From Morgan State to St. Augustine, we take classes at Shaw. After I graduated, I went to North Carolina Central to get my master's, and then I went to Howard University to work on my doctorate. I think I trumped y'all. But this year I have the pleasure of serving as advisor to the NCT. And as you've heard today, our team has spent the last few months visiting, listening, and learning from all of you in this room. It has been amazing. So when I say there's genius in this room, I have experienced the genius that's in this room. So I know when we have these tabletop conversations that we're going to have today, you're going to bring the fire. You're going to do what it says in the Bible in Timothy. You're going to unbank the fire that's already in you, and you're going to talk about the things that we can do to propel us even further. There is genius in this room. And so when you said, somebody asked, well, who do we need to be in front of? Who needs to be in the room? Who do we need to talk to? You got the people that you need to talk to in you. That man told you he's from Belt. Now, if you got a Belt card in your pocket, I want you to raise your hand. Because we're talking about economic engine in this room. We're talking about My Future NC. We're talking about the Hunt Institute. They're in the room. They're listening to you. They are connected. So what we want to do is be able to tell our story, tell it compellingly, but also talk about those things that we know or that we think can help us propel us to even further heights. All right? We want to talk about collaboration. We want to talk about those things that we can do to collaborate with each other. Like I said, St. Alva allowed me to take classes at Shaw. North Carolina Central used to have a pathway to engineering. Not at A&T, but to Georgia Tech. We're talking about years ago. So folks, we have abilities to collaborate with each other, to do research and make all things possible, to get the money that we're supposed to get. So I'm expecting to have those kind of conversations at their table. Now, you will find a guiding list of questions at each table. Now, there's a staff member that's going to be with you from one of our partner organizations as a facilitator. Now, we're going to engage in those conversations. We only have a few minutes now to 1:50, because I know you got to get back on the road. We may be able to do it to about 2 o'clock. We ran a little over. So, we're going to get busy doing that. Clear your place, or somebody's coming around to help you clear your place so you can have these conversations. Stay masked up. We're still in COVID, and let's get with it. All right, thank you.
So this is my child that